Hi guys, this is Pill Eater. I'm here with Brandon Adamson, the author of Beatnik Fascism, and I am with also my co-host John.
Hi.
Hey guys.
Hey Adamson. So I think it's interesting your book Beatnik Fascism. I actually picked it up because I found out about it through altleft.com, and I'm kind of the book collector myself, and I like collecting weird fiction and stuff like that. And with a name like Beatnik Fascism, it's one of those oxymoron words when you hear it at first, kind of like the word anarcho-capitalism, or
Right.
even for some sect Asian Aryan. This silly thing where it's two words together and it just flips off your tongue and it gets someone's attention. So, what's the history or the story behind Beatnik Fascism?
Well, it kind of came about originally as something of a joke because my friend was talking about Twilight Zone episodes, and he's just like, oh, the worst Twilight Zone episode ever is the one where those beatnik aliens come to invade Earth. And I was like, no, that one's great. It's like one of my favorite episodes because they're like basically like this, like these aliens that come to Earth to invade, but they disguise themselves basically as like these beatniks, but they have like a fascist aesthetic. They're part of some kind of empire, to take over Earth or something, and that's how they're kind of like in this town where they're just kind of like these three kind of outcasts in this town, but really they're like part of this subversive group. And so it started as kind of a joke like that, where I was like, oh, like beatnik fascism, and I made like a basically like a Twitter account with that aesthetic. And then it gave me an idea that I would, as I would kind of like start reading a lot of, beat literature and things like that. And I started to realize that that there was like this whole segment of social justice and whatnot that was like, that considered the Beat generation to be like these kind of like romantic white supremacists, almost like. So it's kind of like I just thought it was really funny because it's, they that we've come so far that even these people that like were like really into jazz, and like really were just really loved like traveling around and just like getting to know all of these different groups, and like they really were interested in all of these different races and whatnot. Like we've come so far that like even those people are considered Nazi white supremacists, like Kerouac and these people. And then when you actually read these books, like there's things in a lot of the Beat generation literature that's actually like if you read it now, you'd be like, wow, like that wouldn't even get printed today. Like there's all kinds of like race realism and sex realism for sure. I mean, there's like in On the Road they have like he talks about this one guy that he gives him a ride or drives him, and he's like someone who's gay from like San Francisco or something. And like, there's like 2 pages of them like making fun of him, calling him a fairy and all of this stuff. Like, so there's that. And then I also kind of could relate to it in the sense that in these current movements, like the alt-right and whatnot, like how much you can really relate to people having basically just checked out of society and has kind of like an artistic kind of movement that of people like just like in the beatniks and the Beat generation were people who didn't really assimilate into the post World War II 1950s society. Like they kind of checked out of that and went and wanted to do their own thing. I think that's how you see a lot of people in the alt-right, which are basically like the post-Cold War, globalist society. They basically checked out of that, checked out of a lot of the TV and pop culture and sports ball and all that stuff, and are just kind of like doing their own thing, completely detached from it.
It's also true. It's like, and I'm thinking of the old Philip Marlowe pulps, especially The Big Sleep, and he would say like that hook-nosed Jewish woman or Jewess, or that happy town nigger. He would just use these words unapologetically in this old school like before it was WASP, white working class. But I know where you're coming from. Where in the '60s there was this unexplicit, there was this racial interest within people, but they were also very free formed of what they were doing. Now that it would trigger social justice warriors and stuff like that, and these French critical theorists now have basically policing over that. You can't even think. I know where you're coming from. Where it's basically they were much more unapologetic and unafraid to do these things.
Yeah, and well, they also, they're kind of accused of being like a romantic racist because, On the Road has some great examples of this where a lot of the beats they kind of they admired the blacks and they wanted to live like them, but in their admiration of them, it was like. Kerouac goes through this kind of monologue with himself where he talks about how he's envious of them, but it's really because like he complains that he's always had these complicated like white ambitions, and he wishes that he could just be simple like them, just do whatever, for kicks, like just do whatever feels right and not care about the future or anything. So it was like in their, admiration for these groups and their kind of, fetishizing them. It's because of they're in the same way they're fetishizing like the stereotype and like the simple-mindedness of them. So in a way, it's kind of reinforcing something. It's just kind of like from whatever background that they came from. They were interested in something in learning about something different. Doing things a different way. And there's a bunch of examples in On the Road of stuff that like people would totally. If you said that today, someone would be, they would easily be fired. They would be cast out from public life. Just these simple jokes like he makes when they're driving into New York, and he's like, we're driving into Manhattan as we drove in. It felt like we were a bunch of Arabs going to blow up the Empire State Building, or something. He says something like just exactly like that, which is kind of eerie because this is 50 years before the Twin Towers came down.
John, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just wondering, so in terms of political views, obviously the original beatniks, you're talking about Kerouac, Ginsberg, these were very leftist. So you're saying that they're coming from a diametrically opposite view, or?
Well, I think Ginsberg was very left, but Kerouac was not. He was actually... in fact, he was actually on Buckley's program, and he said that he had always voted Republican. Actually, he even voted for Hoover. He said, and you can read about online where he said that Joe McCarthy was his. He thought he was the only honest person in the Senate, because he just was basically said what he felt and would just didn't go through with all the bullshit. But like, I think that for the most part. A lot of the Beat generation was really not political. It was more of an artistic movement. I think that Kerouac never liked the fact that Ginsberg and all these other people made it into something else. But I would say that I actually culturally very much identify with them. I don't really identify with the right wing in terms. Of culture or anything like that. I look at it as though you have a reflection of a certain time period, and when the time period that they were living in, the U.S. was like 90% white or something like that. So they were looking at things from a completely different perspective than if you're, living in a city that's only 20% white. Like it may be that in order to find something interesting going on, like, the multiculturalism's all around you. So maybe like just finding your own culture is the thing that you're out there seeking.
So you're saying that sorry, so social justice is basically like the new bourgeois, the way that the bourgeois was in the 1950s, the 1950s lifestyle. So being fascism, or whatever you call it, is a reaction against sort of the modern world in that sense.
Yeah, well, if you look at it, and like, I don't like to be like, I always hate when people like Paul Joseph Watson say things like, oh, conservatism is the new punk rock or something like that. Like, to me, that's just super cheesy. I do think, though, there is something to it in the sense that if you look at the 1950s, you could see these people being blacklisted that were essentially, communists, that had to go before these tribunals and whatnot, these hearings and so forth. And that's kind of what, you would be blacklisted from jobs and so forth. And you kind of had to you had to stay and say, I'm not a communist. So, well, that's kind of how it is like now with anyone with any kind of really politically incorrect views or racial views, or even just the mildest kind. Like I said, that's kind of partially where the title of my book comes, is that it's like, geez, we've come so far that even these beatniks, who were like, not fascist by any means, but if they were alive today, they would be, they would be cast out of polite society as white supremacists, even in the mildest sense. So I think that there is something to that. And I think most people that are kind of, oddly, like in the alt-right, you can actually kind of relate to some of these 1950s communists, not even in a political sense, but just in the sense that, like, you got to watch what you say, or, they'll come out. Because if you look at any big corporation or anything, they're totally fine with social justice, and even violent social justice warriors. They kind of look the other way. They don't care. But if you just made like a sexist joke or something, like you're toast.
Yeah. There's a poem you have in one of the beatnik fascism called the Swinging Nationalist. And from what I've read from it, it seems to me that, especially like you were talking about how the conservatism is like this new punk rock, yet at the same time you never really are categorized with such attractions like Christians, homophobes, neocolonialists, or manospherisms as this if there is no place in the alt-right if you have ideals that are contradictory to that. And as we were talking before about this kind of alt-left or beatnik fascism, or that there is this Jack Kerouac wouldn't even fit in the alt-right, even though he had very things that would be acceptable in that.
Right. He was actually something of like a reactionary Catholic, which is odd, but not something that you would expect. But I think that you bring something else that, like, I haven't really brought up yet, and that is a major theme of the book is not just how about living in outcasts, like within the modern world so much, but also you find that when you get into these movements that you find yourself again as an outcast, like even within these movements, like where you find like, oh, so that's kind of where I get to the point where you just say like, gee, like, there really is no movement. Really, I'm just on my own because I wanted to, I wanted to separate and kind of rebel against this thing. But then I realized this group of people I got into, like, they're not my people. Like they're not on the same page as I am either. So really, I'm just like kind of an outcast here too. And I think that that's what, you could probably relate to that as well, because I think part of what the alternative left is it's more abstract than anything, because it's kind of a way of like just saying like, yeah, here are the people that didn't fit in here either. Like we didn't fit in there or didn't fit in here, and we don't even fit in with each other. Like
it's
so.
like there's a poem I'm looking at as you're talking with the word abstract children, as if in the poem you're talking about how there's different abstract children or at least that something about the objective nature, and that like you just said, everything where it's like we could have the most convoluted ideals ever, and yet we're talking usually about the same thing. Whether that might be civic nationalism through Donald Trump, where you might have like a tranny person like Blair White, or a black kid being pro-Trump, and then at the same time you could have people on the alt-right, who are basically different views. You could say Richard Spencer's European Imperium, or Greg Johnson's European ethno-states. It seems to be that we're definitely in this. It seems like we're in this snowflake generation, or at least this weird post-snowflake, where we're taking these things to a point seriously, and everybody can make their own cargo cult in some respect.
Yeah, well, I think that if you look at periods of time when, when whatever was existing was in the process of collapsing, like post that, you see a lot of people just jumping from like movement to movement for 20 or 30 years. You saw that like around the time of World War I and after that, where you had all of these weird movements cropping up, and also kind of for a while you had a long period of just basically like Republicans and Democrats, and then like in the 1970s you started to see all of these weird cults in the post 60s crack up, and then I think you see a lot of these political dissidents, whether it be you or me, all these different people have kind of like flirted with all of these different groups.
Have you heard of a writer called, I think it's Hakim Bey or something, talks about temporary anomalous zones? You familiar?
Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar with it. No, I'm not familiar with it. But you could elaborate on it if you want.
He's just a writer. He talks a lot about what you were just speaking about, where, in sort of the pre-internet era, people would gather together in, say, some sort of group where, just like Polita was saying, is this type of cargo cult or subculture, and they would create these temporary communities, and then they would drift apart. Now with the internet, a lot more of it, the so-called beatnik culture, such as represented in your book, seems to be happening online.
Yeah, I think, and another component to that is that it's with the internet, it's very easy to create like a quasi movement or culture. Like all you got to do is throw up a website and a few. It doesn't really take long to get. There's nothing really that you have to build that would take the kind of time in the real world where these cults and things like you'd have to make newspapers and hand out flyers and things like that. Like you can just put up a website overnight and boom, like Asianarianism is a thing.
Yeah, right?
You have like.
And 4chan will be talking about it and taking it as if there were 1,000 people outside being proselytized into it.
Yeah, if you all you have to do is if you make like a Twitter account with a certain theme that has good content, then boom, you've got yourself like a little cargo cult movement. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. But I think that if you look at the poem that really illustrates, I think what I'm talking about is a movement magnified, because that is where like to people who are outside, they think that like like Milo and Richard Spencer and like Gavin McGinnis and all of these people, that it's all the same, but like once the closer you get into it, you realize nobody's really on the same page, and all of these people hate each other and they hate you too. Like, and so it's like, and you hate them, and you're just like, ugh. And you wonder why like people are such like assholes in these movements. It's just because if you look around, like there's just there's no cohesion there. Even if you look at the new Casper mag, right? If you take all of the people in that group that write for that, nobody's really on the same page like at all. It's great that it's existent and it's awesome, but if you look, you find that even in the smallest of these little groups, you see that. Once you look closer, you have, one person is like a traditional Catholic, and then one person's an atheist, one person's a pagan. You have all these just totally like incompatible ideologies that are kind of like fighting something else, but at the same time they all hate each other too. It's very kind of disheartening.
Let me, I have the page right here. I'll read the movement magnified aloud, so just so the audience know what it's about. So, you're on your own. Look around you. Look around at your brothers in blood. There are no allies here, really. Just a hodgepodge of competing ideologies. There is no group cohesion. Nobody can ever agree on what the core principles should be. Identitarians without an identity are like libertarians minus the liberty. Like communists without communal living. They've got nothing, not a bill, and at the end of the day they have nobody to swallow their pill. There isn't even a willing coalition to work with. There's nothing but distrust and infighting. Pull out the magnifying glass and look more closely. Observe people's actions. Listen to what they say, and recognize that they don't think the things you do. Nobody wants the world you want, except for the idiosyncratic few. It's up to you to conceptualize, create, build, and maintain a viable nation. Maybe someone will show up. So yeah, that's just when we're talking about these things where on the internet, places like Casper Mag, it can be a whole coalition of people who are disenfranchised, right, from one source of another. Like, I really think in some respect, going on that thought, it's like I just recently contributed a piece to Casper Mag, and I think it's this kind of alt-left thing going on Casper Mag, even though the guy, Oswald Spengler, doesn't really want to associate with political terms. He's having more fun with it, but at the same time, I do think there is this kind of alt-left following with Oswald Spengler. It's almost like the avant-garde artist of the alt-right, or this alt-left, or like the authentic alt-left, and they're doing their aesthetic thing over on Casper Mag, and I really think that's really cool what's happening. Some of these movements could definitely make sense, and before you know it, maybe in 2 or 3 years, you'll have yourself media exposure and then a Wikipedia page.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I think that what ends up happening is because whenever you get into the avant-garde or any kind of like this sort of thing, it almost always separates out like the true conservatives, because like they have very narrow ideas about what art is and about like what literature should be. So it's like the kind of stuff that they're going to want to create is like, it's a lot of it isn't going to be outlandish or surreal enough to really, to really make waves or anything. You know what I mean? Like it's like, oil paintings and things like that are beautiful, but no one's going to be really getting excited about or put any groundbreaking, any groundbreaking effort around a site that's devoted to traditional literature or anything. And I think that's because people are really always, they want to be excited about the future. And so when all you're doing is just going back to a certain standard or a certain period of time, I think that it's like people want like a more creative vision for the future. And so you're always going to end up with a more, a little bit more left-oriented avant-garde, I think.
Are you meaning it's more transient or something that has some sort of framework?
Well, I mean that in order for like a certain like an artistic movement or something to be really really successful or make waves or get people excited about it, like it has to be interesting, and so a lot of like true conservatives or whatnot, like they have a very narrow view of what art should be, and it's completely centered upon like what is the way it was in like the 14th or 15th century, like pre-Enlightenment stuff, or just a certain standard, which you can go back to that, but that stuff still exists. And if you're, you need like wild and creative solutions to the kind of crazy world that we have. And I just think that people aren't going to be really excited about literature that's just like, everyone needs to go back to church, or something. That's basically what, what I'm talking about, Pill Eater, because you definitely deal with those people, I think, on a regular basis. And they definitely have a point, because if you look at a lot of like artistic culture, and you see now where it's just like, like a conceptual art piece of like, Legos in a bloody bathtub or something like that. Like, it's just ridiculous. But at the same time, like, a certain kind of, like, it takes a certain kind of mind to make things that are weird enough and interesting enough that people are going to see it as some kind of vision for the future.
It's unfortunate today because the book industry, we know it, is so kind of dead that it has nothing to sell to the masses, but like it has to control the normie masses to sell normie books. As there was this one article you shared, I think it was from the Chicago Tribune, about how that there's these inspectors that have to look over the books, to make sure that there's no trigger warnings or sensitivity issues before they give it out, and they put it on the shelf. In a way, they're almost catering the consumers to make them buy stuff that they're going to buy, right? Everyone hated when Twilight came out, because everyone thought, oh, what a bogus book, Twilight. And yet at the same time, people read that stuff, right? The normie people with such that you could say...
they ate it up.
Yeah, they ate it up. That was the type of people, right? And it takes normie people to read normie books. I don't, some people get really snobbish about that. Yet at the same time, it's kind of worrisome, is because you could be publishing a book by whatever political issue, and then people will buy it for the sake of upholding a certain ideology as a religion, right? And so why I think the book industry is strange right now is because there are literally people that want to make a living off a thing, and they will treat books as capital, right? And yet at the same time, they will have a liberal ideology that will completely contradict that, the whole classic cultural Marxist thing. And yet it's weird because it's hard to make money off of art, first of all, because you definitely have to treat art as capital. But when it comes to the book industry, I really think the book industry is almost totalitarian, is because it's selling things that should be liberated and free, and information. We have the internet. It's as if, same with the music industry, right? They'll sell music now on vinyl record, so you can go ahead and spend $30, $40 on 2 vinyl records. That's unnecessary. The same way you'll buy a special artsy looking book, right? We're in love with the physical object, not so much of why we buy these things, And I think also at the same time, Lulu and CreateSpace, these self-publishing is definitely a space where to go, especially in the internet age, where we can go on Reddit or a forum and find out about these things and self-publish our own works and buy them on demand when the consumer feels like it, than to buy multiple copies and to sell them. So it's definitely a strange era, art, and people have been treating, I'm talking particularly about the classical group of soccer moms who go on like a Thursday night and talk about some book about a kid with autism who loses its dog and says, it's this cheesy, like, I'm talking about that market, first of all. I'm not talking about the avant-garde market, but I'm saying books are being told, sold as that. So what are your thoughts on the book industry?
Well, the book industry has always had a lot of censorship, from what I've seen. They had, even if you read through like Robert Heinlein's letters and whatnot, you see all of the nitpicking that was done to his books over little, little like sexual innuendos and thing like if you read through it would just be like the most ridiculous thing. Like the editor would be like, you've got to change this scene where like this girl's coming out and she's wearing a nightgown or something. You can't say that, or something like that. So he would have to deal with all of that. And, so in terms of the book industry, I think that the only way to deal with it is to actually, you just have to not do it for the money, and you have to go around the forces that are out there, and instead of going through these publishers and distributors and whatnot, you just have to just send the books to the stores yourself. Just mail them directly to people, and then they'll have take out the middleman, and you won't necessarily be making money, but you will be able to get your message out there, even so much as if you just go to the bookstore and put your book on the shelf. Like, yeah, you're not going to make any money if they sell it, but but that's the only way. You've got to just go around these obstacles and not try to go through them.
Can you tell us a little bit about the themes? I know some of them feature things like transhumanism or transgressive ideas, that the beatniks talked about. Can you explain some of your poetry for people who haven't read it?
Yeah, I would guess that a lot of it is very, very futurist, and kind of what a lot of the beatniks were really interested in, like expanding their consciousness with like psychedelic drugs and whatnot. They use that kind of stuff to help them, write and kind of, achieve a higher, what they believe is like a higher mental state, by taking LSD and these things. And I kind of was very interested in just how people now, in terms of like, transhumanism and futurism or whatnot, are looking to enhance their mind and enhance their consciousness, like using technology and computers. And I was always very interested in transhumanism. I consider myself as someone who subscribes to transhumanism, in terms of like wanting people to live longer in order to be able to learn more and be smarter, and find ways to utilize machines to improve the lives of humans.
Do you subscribe to any of the theories of the Neoreactionaries in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, like I used to kind of hang out in those circles. Maybe a couple of years ago, I kind of parted ways with them, and we became, the things that attracted me toward it was a lot of the futurism and just kind of the idea that like, that democracy wasn't really enough and that we needed to look towards something else. But it seemed to me that a lot of my major problems with Neoreaction was that they tended to be very like kind of these like a mix of these libertarian like tech capitalists, like they were really into capitalism and whatnot. And I'm really kind of anti-capitalist. I do associate more with like fascist economics and even like communism to a degree. But I also there was like Neoreaction also became very heavily into like it was very like there was a wing that was very like traditional Catholic thing, and as someone who's like an atheist who's very like somewhat socially liberal, like I just never got along with those people who wanted to like return to like the Pope rule, but with a Pope obviously like less paused than the one that we have now.
I found that there was a massive dichotomy really between the traditionalists and the more kind of Neoreactionaries who would use almost Neoreaction as a vehicle to forward technology or human technological process.
Yeah, I think that there definitely is, because if you look at someone like Nick Land, like his ideology isn't really at all, I don't think compatible with like these these traditional Catholics and whatnot. And I think that a big problem is with the traditionalists is that they have a certain view of what makes society work, but when you have technology constantly changing, people you can either just be completely anti-technology and everyone lives in this kind of like, little house on the prairie village or something like that, like kind of like those, those weird, like, those weird, like, Mormon colonies that you see in the middle of nowhere. But you can also, I think that it's, humans like adapt to technology. So if you have a certain idea about things, what if humans in the future live to be 500 years old, because they find some way to reverse some of the genes of aging, and machines and whatnot that, change the way that people interact with each other and what jobs people do. And I think that, humans constantly adapt. So I think that just because something worked in a certain period of time, that it may not be compatible with where technology takes us, and humans have to adapt to that. Or there are other neo-reactionaries that are just basically like, no, we're just going to get away from that and just live in the mountains and have organic farms, and everyone is mandated to go to church every week. But I think that there is that's partially just like those are just irreconcilable elements, I think, within neo-reaction. It also made it very confusing, because when you get into those circles, again, it just goes right back to, you get into it and you think like, yeah, these people are kind of going in the direction that I want to go in. And then you get into the group and you realize that like everyone has their own wild ideas about, what's wrong with the Enlightenment, or, what's wrong with this or that, or modernity, as they like to say, which I consider to be the most like, kind of like meaningless, abstract thing. Like when some people are just like, oh, I hate modernity. Well, I don't hate modernity.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like I don't like. What do you mean? What about modernity? Like, I like that. People don't die of these diseases that we eradicated on that. Like tuberculosis and things that people used to die of. By like the hundreds of thousands. So yeah, there are some, but just saying that you're against modernity, or like if it's too vague or abstract, then you end up with these people that just like everyone is going in different directions.
What are your favorite poems you written for the book?
That's a really good question. I mean, I would say that I really liked the first one, the antiquated formula, because I think that it was something that like I started writing a long time ago, and I just it took me a long time to really figure out where I was going to go with it. It was kind of like it was something that I had like halfway done for forever, and I was just like, I got to figure out where to go with this. But I think that is probably my favorite, or one of my favorite poems, because I think that it really says a lot about my position, because it's kind of like people always say that you can't go when you want to go back to something from the past, that it's like you're just like rewinding a VHS tape or something, and then you're just going to play and go right back where you were. So it's like that poem is really about that. It's like, well, but it's like time travel also, where there are directions and things that people may have started going in the past or looking at that no one ended up going in those directions, so that you can go back and look at those things. And, it could be that there were things that there are really other things to branch off of into the future, that you're not necessarily coming straight back. And that's really, I think, what what the point of that poem was, where it says, I like going to antique stores because it's like, it's the closest you can get to traveling in time, but you're not really just going necessarily only going back in time, because you can sometimes find things in antiques that are actually more advanced ideas than what you see today, and that there were different visions for the future that you could, if you were to take that vision and then go, you would end up in like a completely different time period in the future. By taking those ideas and those aesthetics, anything, even if you just find like an old design for something where you can look at it and say, yeah, that's old, but if we went that way, like our society would actually be in the future from where it is today.
I think I should read that one aloud because I have the poem right here. So I'll read this one.
Well, it's kind of long, but
yeah, I could do it. Let's do it.
All right.
The antiquated formula. I love going to antique stores. It's the closest I can get to traveling in time. As I zig down the aisles of memory lane, the artifacts of the shelves vividly transport me to lost eras and places, faded and filled away into the historical memory banks, leaving only traces. My eyes hone in on a statuette of a bronze centurion, and suddenly I'm there watching helplessly from the visible, waxing nostalgic for the old pre-Christian Pantheon days when Jupiter and Mars willed us to victory, and Cupid shot arrows of affection into our pulse-pounding hearts, drunk out of our minds off the wine of Bacchus as we danced over the corpse of conquered foreigners and made love with their wives, sons, and daughters, absorbing them into our growing empirical blob of a world. Now I can only look on regrettably as Alaric's Visigoth army sacks Rome, looting everything of value and stripping away layers upon layers of civilization achievements that had accumulated over the centuries. If only I could have brought the defenders of the city some laser guns or something. Perhaps they might have staved off the attack and held out a little longer. It was probably too late already by then. Dejectedly, I turn another shelf where I spot a stack of old 45s, and just like that, I'm swinging like 16 on a summer evening at a smoke-filled espresso lounge in Venice, California in 1960. Patsy Ray's on stage singing Beatnik Wish as I sit quietly in the front row. My worn black turtleneck obscures secret sweat as I scope for a young Ginchy gal to pluck and duck out to Pucker Palace for a quick flick on a wild night that's sure to throw babies out of the balcony of some big daddy-o's mad pad in the end. Yet one is not restricted to venturing directly backwards, taking on a ride on a carousel projector and getting off at that familiar favorite vacational slide, pressing rewind and play on a tape recorder over and over to remind of better times while trapping oneself into a kind of escapist neurogelia to indulge in a fit of psychedelic telepathical nostalgia. That's a single word. Appealing as that may be, you can also travel to the future, though the relics of the past depicted visions that didn't come to fruition, mementos of bold, imaginative, and ambition predictions, which in some cases offered up a world more advanced than the one we now live in. The abstract conceptions of contraptions we've yet to fly, and out-of-print paperbacks of theories we barely tried, abandoned designs that never quite took off, and the concrete plans for cities in the sky that didn't materialize. They represented alternative timelines, old trees we've already climbed with an infinite number of directions they can still branch off into, trips we could have taken and the way out of places we can still go, forsaken paths we can still traverse, if we're not adverse to being more than tiptoeing footsteps in the shadows of those threatened by our continued existence going forward. So, yep, that's interesting.
Yeah, and that actually that reminds me of something actually when I talk about haven't you ever done that where you were reading about something in history, whether it be like Civil War or something, and it was just like, but you wish you could go back and like give them some laser guns or something too. Like, don't you ever fantasize about that kind of stuff?
I know that. Remember being in a history class. I think it might have been prehistorical civilization, and this might sound funny. My teacher was telling me about what the men, Spartan men, would do before they would get married, and where they would go in the brothels, and basically all the women that would cater to them. And it'd be like, I was thinking back then, free sex back then was probably easy to obtain. Something, very Freudian or something, but sexual
Right.
things like that. I don't know about the laser gun part, but the part where, if I'm told, one Greek general or Roman general would go all the way to like the Central Asia and find himself a, broken language girl, and take over there. And I feel like, it was easy to obtain women back then. Probably something
Right.
on that lines.
You wanted to go back and like plunder, women, like to ravage them and whatnot. But actually, there is a kind of another inspiration of mine. Is there one of my favorite episodes of the Twilight Zone is called "The Seventh is Made of Phantoms," and it's what it's actually about is it's set in like the 1960s and or late 1950s, but it's basically that you have these three they're like Army or National Guardsmen or whatever, and they're just kind of in the middle of in the middle of nowhere, and they're just kind of doing like some training exercises with their tank. And there's just these three guys in the tank, and they're just doing these training exercises. And something happens where they get transported back in time, like to, and they realize that they're back in the little battle of Little Bighorn, Custer's last stand, as it was called then, and like, so they're back there, and they have to decide like, are they going to, and this is like in PC times. So like they actually are like, they want to help Custer win the battle, which you would never see something like that made today. But this was in the 60s when, that was still, not considered taboo, like where General Custer wasn't considered the villain really. And so these three guys in their tank, they decide that they're going to join the battle with Custer and try to help him win the Indians, because they know that he gets massacred there and his forces get destroyed. And so they ended up doing that, but they can't get their tank working. So it's just the three of them, and they have to go into battle with just their guns. And then it turns out that, of course, like they didn't, their involvement didn't have any effect, but their names are now like on the monument. They're like supervising officer or something. He's looking for them because they're missing, and he sees that their name is on the monument at, back then it was called Custer's Last Stand was the name of the monument. And then they changed it, I think, to Little Bighorn because it was, to placate the Native Americans. But that was also always kind of, I think, an episode that I found kind of inspirational too. But even because when I saw it in like the 90s, I thought like, oh, this is great. They're not like vilifying General Custer, our ancestors. They actually want to help him win or something. So it's like even in the 90s, like when I was still, I didn't have formulated views on this stuff. I still had like an instinctive, showed an instinctive solidarity with these ancestors.
Yeah, I was thinking of other things with Twilight Zone episodes. Do you remember the Twilight Zone episode, The Obsolete Man?
I don't know. I can't remember. I have most of them on DVD, but I don't.
That was
I don't
my
know
favorite
if
one.
I've seen that one recently.
That basically was there's no information in the future. You have to follow one dictatorship, but there was only one more guy left, and he read books. And then he basically helped a guy and got him on his side that information was important. And then he became the new obsolete man, became the only one who was informed. And it became this really strange convoluted message about why communism basically suppresses our individual liberty, and basically it's good to live in America because you have the right to do what you want, freedom of expression. It's my favorite episode of the Twilight Zone, definitely The Obsolete Man.
Yeah, that's That sounds great. I have most of them on DVD, but I actually don't have that one.
Would you claim Ballard, J.G. Ballard, as a influence on your work?
Who?
Do you know J.G. Ballard, the writer?
No, I wouldn't claim him as an influence.
Who would be influences on your writing style, do you think, apart from the obvious beat generation?
Well, in terms of my writing style, I think that it's just it could be influenced by what I've read, but a lot of the stuff that I've read, who were my influences, like as authors, like people like John Updike, I wouldn't say that like I really took from their writing style. I would say that I actually do think I can relate to a lot of the beat writing style, just in the sense of speed of it, and then also it's very like stream of consciousness oriented writing. And it's tough to say, but I think that oddly that a lot of my writing style isn't necessarily influenced by actual writers. I think that it's influenced by something at least in my generation, which is Generation X, which is like this kind of real like overload in childhood of popular culture and commercials and things like that, to where there's such an overload of that it almost like it almost just like you can't get it out of your mind. It relates to everything that you do, and you see that even with like other kind of Generation X authors, like people like not even people that I would agree with politically or anything. You just see that kind of a trend, like Chuck Klosterman and that kind of thing, where it's just like all of this pop culture stuff that you've absorbed is just kind of, it's totally ingrained, and you can't really get it kind of, you end up associating things you do with a lot of this pop culture stuff. And you even would see that a little bit further back in the 50s and 60s with some of the stuff that like Robert Crumb was doing, how when he was do like his comics and stuff, like it always had elements of this like 1950s advertising and whatnot, because it was just in these, cartoons and things that were this old Disney stuff, because it was just so, it was so prevalent in his mind. And I think that as someone, as like a kid from the 80s who grew up with like Garbage Pail Kids and Saturday morning cartoons and, all of these different, movies and this weird pop culture stuff, that it's just like, you can detach from it to a degree, but it's always like once that stuff is in your mind, like it's just in there somewhere. And I think that has like an influence on my writing style. You can see that even in a lot of the essays and things that I write, like I can relate it to scenes and films and things like that. Not really like you see with these kind of like these retards today that relate everything to like Harry Potter and Star Wars and things like that. But I think that it's just almost everything is just like, oh gosh, this reminds me of this commercial I saw in 1986, this scene or something like that. It's like, it's exactly this. You can almost like convey it abstractly through that. So I always, when I do writing and stuff in blogs, I'm constantly linking to these different video clips and some things that kind of like illustrate in my mind or kind of throw back to it.
You've actually sent some copies in the mail to some people, and I think you've said that you might have sent a copy of Beatnik Fascism to PewDiePie, right? The YouTuber guy who gets the most subscribers ever.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, like, I sent one to him, and, I have no idea. He probably would get creeped out and just throw it in the trash or something. But I felt like, someone like him that maybe he could actually relate to it, because he's someone who's just really, it's just kind of like minding his own business and he's doing his own thing. And he's basically being branded as this kind of like horrible, Nazi, like fascist or person, but really he's just like. So I think that he might be able to relate to the book in some way as just someone who's just kind of like, he has 50 million followers, but in a way, like he's kind of. He's kind of isolated in his own way and alienated from being able to say what he wants, and that's really the bottom line. It doesn't really matter, like if, he may not have the same political beliefs as like you or me, or, anyone in the alt-right, he may just be like, but even if he's just a provocateur or something, just, even someone just that's, wants to make some off-color jokes or something, like, and just he wants to be himself, like that's. And I think that's maybe he could relate to it. But so I mailed him a copy. I like mailing them out to people. Sometimes they get, they might get creeped out or whatever. But what is it? They say there are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are no old bold pilots. Yeah. So if what have you got to lose, really?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we're coming to the close to the hour, but is there anything you would like to say about your future activities, what you plan on doing? Are you going to release another book of poetry, or do you plan on just advertising Beatnik Fascism and getting it out there? At least doing what is your plans for the future on that?
Well, right now I'm working on recording like an EP album, and that's my main thing right now. I am working on another. I have a number of writing projects, but I'm working on another book of poetry that really isn't political or anything really associated with politics, and that is just kind of some project I'm working on of writing these poems where I'm at the airport and just like the airport in Phoenix has this really great like sky train, that they built, which is just amazing. So it's like, but it's just free to ride it. So I'm just going to like go there and just ride it all day and just write, like, I'll just have my girlfriend drop me off there, I'll stay there for 8 hours and just ride this thing and write poems. And then, whatever I come up with, I'm just going to release it. But I don't like to do everything political or whatnot. I think that in the times we live in, there is a certain sense that when I see stuff that isn't political or whatever, that it's almost just kind of, it's almost like a relic from a different time. It's just kind of like, what are you working on that for? Like, we're almost in the middle of like a civil war here. Like, what are you doing this useless crap? Like, it's like 1992 and you're making some jokey zine or something, like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. It's just like, it just seems so like, I just look back at some of the stuff I was doing and it's just like, oh, like, why wasn't I focused on like helping or you're working on something meaning instead of just making like this weird lo-fi music about like, shows that were on with lyrics about characters from shows on TV and stuff like I used to do in the 90s. Like, why wasn't I writing these manifestos and shit? Like, but at the same time, it was a completely different time period. So, yeah, I like your time period now. Go ahead.
Does the music relate to a lot of your writing in terms of being experimental, or?
Yeah, I guess you would say that it does. I actually kind of started out writing poetry before music when in about the mid 90s, like 94, 95, I started writing poetry, and it was really just because I was like, I had all these magazines, like, and in the back, it would say like, they would have all these scammy like poetry contests and stuff like that, and I would be like, well, I'm just gonna like sit in my room and just write poetry and just mail it to these places. And then I started like, I realized that those like poetry contests or whatever they were just scams. But in the process of like researching, I found like all of these other places that you could submit poetry to, and I started just like in like about 1995 or so, I started submitting stuff to these places, and I was getting stuff accepted in these like literary journals and whatnot that, and I was only like 17 or something like that. And I was mailing them out and getting, and I was like totally delusional too. Like I would send stuff out to like the New Yorker and like, the Atlantic Monthly and things like that. Like I would just, I had no, even though it said like, that they were only looking for prestigious authors or what, I was always the kind of person that I would just send shit anyways, just for laughs, just cause I could picture someone on the other end reading it being like, what is this shit? And I still do that too. Like when I send out these books to bookstores and record stores or something, like I go on Google Maps and I look at the place and I just picture like some guy opening the package in this place and being like, well, what the fuck is this? What did we just get in the mail here? Beatnik fascism. But I would say that the music, I was always very experimental. And in the early days when I would make music, like it was always like, I was always a very shitty like musician, and it was all about like the lyrics to me. Like I would just like almost like write the poem in the first, and then I would like kind of like try to play some music that would kind of go along with it or something like that. And then over time I got better at actually playing. The music became more important to me, or I realized that it was actually like important to the listener, so I became just less self-indulgent about it. But I would say that it definitely relates. A lot of my songs do take, they're not really political songs, but they may be interpreted, parts of them may be interpreted that way if you listen closely.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Yeah, I think this was a very interesting conversation, and it was nice talking to you, Adamson.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your show. I really like your channel, although I have to say for the record that I've never been attracted to Asian girls, but
That's okay. That's okay.
But
No.
I will say that I do, the one thing I definitely get behind is with Asian Arianism is that I do actually like Thai food, and the Asians definitely do give like a really good massage. Like there is an Asian massage place that I go to regularly. It's not, it's not a happy ending place, but it's just, they really like, I feel like they really know what they're doing.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, I mean, of course.
And the guy always says to me, he says like, shoulder tight. Like he says that like, because I'm in front of my laptop all the time. Like I have, neck problems and whatnot. But yeah, anyways, like yeah, thanks a lot for having me on, and we'll have more conversations in the future, I'm quite sure.
Yes. Well, I'll talk to you next time. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, pal.
Yeah.
Take care, John.